we don't think about it, but really life is, it's the sum of all the thousands of tiny decisions we've made up until that point, you know?
Absolutely.
And sometimes it just takes one tiny decision to completely alter the trajectory of things.
The amazing thing about the mushrooms is that they speak. They talk to you. They will answer questions, carry on conversations. Psilocybin just pulls up a chair on the porch and puts its feet up.
Hey there, welcome back to another episode of Psilocybin Says. I'm your host, Eric Osborne. I'm very happy and excited to be sharing this episode with you today. It's the first installment of the second chapter. Taylor Johnson, he is a men's sex health expert, and it's a great conversation. He's got a great YouTube channel. I've been following his work for quite a while. He's taught me quite a bit, and I am really, really excited to share his work with you all. Before we get too far along, I'm going to start introducing this, folks. Psilocybin Says, going to be going through another little bit of a change. We're going to be shifting branding a little bit. The podcast name is going to actually change completely. I'm going to give you a little time with that. Just let that settle in. There are reasons. There's a method to the madness. We'll explain that as time goes on, but I do want my regular listeners to know that there are some changes coming that are going to help confidently expose the show to a wider audience. So it'll still stay the same content. It'll just be a different name. So look forward to that. That's coming as time allows. We're just not stressing, but moving in that direction. So anyway, yeah, this episode today, I really think you're going to enjoy it. It was a great conversation. I think I just want to let it speak for itself. Why are you going to listen to me? You were here to listen to Taylor. So everything I really want to warn you about or think about, it's just a very honest conversation. What I love about Taylor is that he has been so forthcoming in his sexual experiences, which is what I've tried to model here in these conversations and really in the podcast overall, not just about sex, but everything, every topic that we explore. I want to do so from a very authentic standpoint. Taylor is probably the best Western teacher that I found anyway, that discusses, shall I just say it, semen retention and the use of that in regenerative health. It's a thing, y'all. I know it sounds really weird. People kind of blush or step back. It's not something we spend a whole lot of time talking about, but it is a game changer. And I continue to encourage men to read about it, to study up on it, and to try it out. I am feeling so good right now in this moment, and it's because of that practice. I've been going quite a while here, longer than I have in a while anyway. I've been having so many wonderful sessions with my amazing wife, and I can feel the energy today. When I was at the gym, I actually shared this with her. Like, it gave me, I could feel the energy, the chi, if you want to call it, rising up from my sacrum up into my body and giving me extra strength to keep going, an extra set. I really felt it. It's a very real thing. It's all energy, like the mushrooms have told us so many times before, and that energy can be transmuted and used for different purposes. So sex energy, it's so powerful. It's so amazing. It's so much more than what we think it is. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Taylor. He's going to share some of that with you and a whole lot more about his growth into sexual authenticity. Please let me know in the comments below what you think about it. Give us a review, please. iTunes, Spotify, all that stuff. Especially on Apple, your written review makes a big difference. Don't forget, go to the Patreon. Give us some support. Just $5 a month. $60 a year for this podcast. Come on, it's amazing, right? All right, I appreciate y'all, and I hope you appreciate and find value in this conversation. All right, Taylor Johnson, welcome to Psilocybin Says.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, man, what a pleasure. What a pleasure. Yeah, so Taylor's the host of the Sex Upgraded podcast. It's one of the podcasts that I listen to most. This is, I think, well, sex or psychedelics are either of those are my favorite topics to discuss. So together, like this is like magic land for me. I really want to express a deep appreciation for the vulnerability around sexuality that you bring to the conversations online. It is sorely needed. And I also really appreciate how you begin your episodes with that deep breath and a sigh. So I thought maybe just kind of help you feel a little bit at home, and as it might be valuable for our listeners, if the audience along with us could do the same. Take a deep breath in through your nose and sigh out, and really be present. This is a conversation that could be triggering whenever we've posted episodes around pornography or psychedelics, our sexuality. They tend to not get a lot of listens off the bat. It's like people have to come back to those episodes. You see the numbers go up on those specific episodes over time. But it tells me that there is an interest, albeit potentially reluctant for some. And we'll get into some of that on this conversation. You also say at the outset of your podcast that a thriving sex life helps you to thrive in all areas of your life. And I couldn't agree more. I think this is almost an absolute truth. And I tend to feel like anybody that rejects that perspective, and many people do, is based in shame or fear or some kind of unhealthy relationship with even the concept of sex. So I'd love it if you could share with our audience just how you came into conscious sexuality, assuming as a man of your age, you weren't raised in a conscious sexual environment.
No, definitely not at all. Not at all. My sex ed was horrible when I grew up. But I do want to say and acknowledge that I believe it is possible for people to have very successful lives if they haven't worked on their sex life and if they have a shitty sex life. And at the same time, I would say their lives could be vastly improved from that point of success if they were to work on their sex life and if they were to improve their sex life. So just want to say that clearly up front. My journey into this got started because I used to struggle immensely with sex in my early 20s. I was a sexual disaster of a man in many ways. At least that's what I felt like during that period of my life. I struggled from premature ejaculation. I struggled from porn-induced erectile dysfunction. I was addicted to porn. I was sexually anxious. I went through a period of completely even avoiding women because I was afraid of possibly being attracted to them and possibly having a sexual experience with them in which I would ejaculate too quickly and then go into shame and be less of a man because that's what would happen. And I would feel like less of a man. I just had no concept of what it even meant to be a strong man. And I wondered, will I ever know what it's like to have good sex? Will I ever know what it's like to truly satisfy my partner? Will I ever know what it's like to feel that internally? I really want to, but I don't know. And I was just the pit of sexual mess. So I went on a very long journey of reading all kinds of books and going to all kinds of workshops and really figuring this stuff out internally. And I noticed through that journey that not only did my sex life improve, but my previous business improved dramatically too. I started to make more money. I started to have better connections and work with larger clients and have better friendships, have better family relationships, and everything in my life just leveled up through that experience. And I realized, wow, the people who wrote books about this were not lying. There's something very real and very, it's legit. It's legit. I was skeptical at first, but turns out it's legit. And so now I share this work full time with the world because I believe in it so much. And I see regularly the impact that it has on guys' lives from all walks of life, not just people who you might consider to be in the new age alternative mindset, but big CEOs of different companies, and people who are more traditionally conservative who realize that they also want to have a good sex life. And then they realize, wow, I got a promotion 4 months later because now I'm embodying so much more success and ease and depth in my life that it works out to where people see the value I bring more, and I bring more value because of those things. So I'll pause there because I just said a lot of words and see, how does that land for you? What are you thinking, feeling? Yeah.
Yeah, it feels 100% for me. What comes up is imagining, like even for myself and men that I talk with in my community, just having the courage to acknowledge that this is a lifestyle change or a lifestyle issue that needs some attention is really, really difficult. And I'm curious what you say to men who are just starting to become aware of where they are in their sexual journey.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm never going to come in and just start just telling people they need to change their sex life. Like that's not what I do. But if you're a man who is not satisfied with your life, sex is a useful category to examine. And your sexual habits, your sexual behaviors. How do you masturbate? How often do you masturbate? What do you do when you masturbate? Do you fantasize? Do you watch porn? Have you ever considered the impact that those habits might have on your work life or your relationship? What are your sexual habits with your partner? What do how do you navigate being in the world when you see somebody you're attracted to? How do you navigate being with the gender or sex that you're attracted to? Like all those things, they can really impact us in a big way, but we don't normally think about it because in this culture and society, we usually just shove that stuff under the rug and we think, oh, it's probably something else, or, oh, I don't want to touch that. I'm not going to go there. When in fact, sometimes that's the very thing that can unlock the next phase of our life.
Well, and what do you feel like that reluctance to talk about this subject ultimately goes back to, or yeah.
Man, so many things.
Yeah, it's not ultimately one thing, right?
It's so many different things. And I think we could spend a lot of time theorizing about why, but I think it's useful to just acknowledge the context that we're all living in right now, which is that I would bet 97% of the people listening right now, I bet you did not have a useful sex ed experience when you were younger, but you didn't get the information you needed. I bet you had to learn some things. I bet you probably learned a lot from porn, even if you've since unlearned it or worked to unlearn it. Like we've all had these influences that haven't been positive, that haven't been healthy, that have actually showed us what sex isn't. We see sex in movies, see sex in TV shows. It's always short. It's always rushed. It's always, goes to the peak and ends very quickly. And you don't see any lead up or follow through, so you don't get a real representation of what sex actually is. And you might think, oh, well, it doesn't impact us, but it really does. Like, even if it's on an unconscious level, if we have no models to work from, how are we supposed to, move forward in that realm in a good way? So, and I think also there's just so much sexual shame in our society, and that's just embedded into the fabric of everything that we do. Look at sex educators on the internet. They're getting their accounts banned for just talking about healthy sexuality. I can't be on TikTok saying, hey, you might want to consider not ejaculating every day to porn because it might be negatively impacting your life. That video gets my account banned, but you can have a woman in a G-string shaking her ass, showing the parts of her asshole through her G-string on TikTok. That doesn't get banned, and it's drawing people in. It's basically porn, but it's all backwards. It's all backwards.
It is. Yeah. Well, and like another aspect that's not portrayed, what you've already touched on, is how our sex life bleeds into the rest of our lives, right?
Yeah.
And so even before we get to a healthy, vibrant sex life and how that benefits our professional, interpersonal lives, what is the detriment that's being caused from an unhealthy sex life in all those aspects of lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question.
Some of the detriments, right? Totally. And again, it's not one thing.
For sure. Well, I'll just use my own personal life as an example because I think you'll probably be able to relate to that most. In my younger years, I masturbated to porn regularly, almost on the daily. I would ejaculate multiple times a week, and my sexual relationship with my long-term girlfriend at the time wasn't that great. Like most people, we started out, we had a lot of sex, but eventually we got into this space of just not feeling super attracted to each other, and I didn't really put two and two together. At the same time, I was feeling relatively unmotivated and uninspired in my life and not going in a direction that I was really excited about. And so I remember I went through this period of time of just laying on the floor of my apartment, just looking at the ceiling, thinking to myself, like, what the fuck are you doing, Taylor? This is not the life path you want. You're not feeling good. You're not feeling excited. What are you doing? And I started to evaluate how I was spending my time in my life. And I realized, you know what? People have said that porn negatively impacts the brain and negatively impacts relationships. Maybe I could start experimenting with that. Maybe I'll start experimenting with watching less porn. And I did. And I noticed that when I watched less porn, my attraction to my partner increased. Perhaps not surprisingly at this point, like we all kind of know these things, or some of us might know these things. But also, interestingly, we argued less, we got along better, and we felt more connected. Not only, it wasn't just the sex piece. And so then I thought, this is interesting. So I started to then experiment with how often I was ejaculating, because I had read in some books, hey, if you ejaculate too often, you might actually not be living at your fullest potential. It's a very short way of saying it. So I started to reduce my amount of weekly ejaculations. And I noticed that my overall vitality started to increase. My overall feelings of aliveness, zest started to increase. And then when I did have sex with my partner, there was more of that like animalistic, raw sort of like life force that was in there. And then at a certain point, after reading a couple other books, I decided I was going to try to have sex. And then instead of ejaculating, and I'm going to use some esoteric terms here, but instead of letting my energy out, as some traditions call it, I decided to try circulating that sexual arousal, that sexual pleasure in my body and not ejaculate. And I did it well. I didn't get blue balls. And I remember driving to the grocery store from that experience and being like, whoa, I feel like I got the gold star in Super Mario Brothers. Like I was strong. I was alive. I felt like I was radiating goodness. And I realized, wow, this is legit. People are really onto something here. And I didn't do all that consistently, for the months to come. I just explored with it and came in and out of good and bad habits. But what I noticed is the more that I did those practices, the more motivated I felt in life too. And the more I wanted to put energy into my business. And the more motivated I felt, the more likely it would be that I would go to the gym. The more likely it would be that I would go to a yoga class and really take care of my body. And when I started doing that in combination with everything else, I just started feeling more confident. And so when I would get into conversations and negotiations with different clients, I would have more confidence and I would be able to negotiate higher amounts of money. And then that started snowballing, and I got bigger clients. And I ended up working for some of the biggest companies that are out there. And it was amazing. It was amazing to watch happen and to experience happen. And it wasn't instant and it wasn't overnight, but it was a slow shift of lifestyle to really appreciating, recognizing, and celebrating that being intentional with my sexual choices had a massive ripple effect on the rest of my life, and it improved everything.
I love that. I'm already throwing my outline out the window. I should have known better. I've been, I'm fucking 4 years deep in podcasting now. But bringing up this topic of semen retention, retaining your ejaculation, it has been one of the most, if not the most challenging subjects for me to share with my male counterparts. Almost every friend that I've ever mentioned this to is like, you're fucking crazy. Why in the world? And it's so curious to me. I think it has to be a cultural conditioning, but that the immediate response is rejection is baffling to me, particularly even when it's explained within the context of the benefits that you're sharing here. Why is it just this kind of instant gratification culture, or the kind of the upbringing? Why is it that men reject that so quickly?
Yeah. Well, I was one of those guys also. I just want to own that. I used to reject this. Remember the first times I read about this, heard about it, I was like, you fucking crazy. Why would I ever have sex and not ejaculate? Like the point is to ejaculate, the point. So I get it. I completely understand. And from my perspective now, I also understand where a lot of that comes from. For most guys in this modern society, we don't allow ourselves to experience joy and pleasure and ecstasy in pretty much any area of our life, except for those 7 to 10 seconds of ejaculation. So for a lot of guys, subconsciously, when you say, oh, maybe try not ejaculating during sex, there's this protective response of like, whoa, I'm not giving up my pleasure. That's how I have pleasure in life. Fuck you, you know? Like that's a piece of it too. Also, a lot of guys, one of their main mechanisms to relax and to de-stress in life is to ejaculate. And so if you say maybe try don't ejaculating, they're like, no fucking way, dude, I need to have that release at the end of the day, otherwise I can't sleep, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of self-protective things going on there under the surface. You know, it might not cognitively be able to identify those up front, but those are two really big things that keep guys locked into the cycle of ejaculation every time you have sex. And to be clear, I love ejaculation. I love ejaculatory orgasms. I have them with my partner, who's a woman, and I just do them on occasion with intention. And because I don't do them every time by default, they become so much more pleasurable for myself and my partner, you know? And when I have sex and I don't end in ejaculation, she doesn't feel me like drop off and disappear from the sexual connection. Like we can stay there in that energy. And it's a really beautiful experience for both her and myself.
I'm gonna need to ask Courtney about this, but I feel like she was dating someone who had practiced this prior to our meeting, and I feel like when she brought it up to me, I was curious from the start. I may have rejected it, and I'm not remembering that. But I feel like it was always, for me though, it was psychedelics really that really opened this up. I had a couple of trips 10 or so years ago. Thank you. That one, I before reading any of the material, I viscerally experienced the microcosmic orbit. I saw this energy coming through my navel and going up through my circuitry, and there was quite a bit of kind of phenomenology that happened after that. It got me really curious as to what I was experiencing, which then led me to Mantak Chia, and then led me to you and some other teachers. And then I had an experience shortly thereafter, that initial microcosmic orbit one, where with my eyes closed, I felt this intimate connection between my testicles and my eyes. And somehow those experiences really piqued my curiosity around, you know, the deeper nature of sexuality. I didn't grow up sex being sacred. It was espoused as sacred because you created a life, but it was only sacred if you create a life, you know. And then to have a deeper understanding of our non-physical being and how these physical behaviors, physical actions contribute to that non-physical being and vice versa. So like how do you, in terms of kind of thinking of sexuality in a sacred way, I mean, you've already brought intentionality up in terms of ejaculation, but how do you connect or relate the sacred to sexuality at this point?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Good thing. I mean, I'm glad you brought in psychedelics there too, because I saw that as a useful segue where we were. So I'll speak to the sacredness and then also to some of the psychedelic pieces as well. And I do consider sex sacred, but I also want to be clear that to me, that doesn't mean that my partner and I are lighting candles always and having soft, sensual massage music going on and having this really slow, kind of intimate, stereotypically new age type experience, right? We can do that because that is one form of interacting. I could also tie her up on the bed and fuck her wildly like an animal, and she could fuck me wildly like an animal, and that could be sacred. We could slap each other in the context of sex, like that could be sacred. Because really, ultimately, what makes something sacred? It's the level of intentionality and awareness and devotion and presence we bring to that moment. You know, this could be a sacred experience if we flip that switch and just allow for that openness to happen. You know, like that's possible. And so that's really the lens that I'm coming to sex with when I consider it sacred. It's kind of a traditionally tantric approach in terms of finding divinity or finding the sacred in everything that is in every moment versus externalizing that to some other force. Like that's more of the perspective that I take. And before I move to the psychedelic piece, I'll pause and see, like, how does that land for you? Do you have any thoughts or questions about that?
No, it's beautiful. The other kind of aspect that comes into consideration draws upon, I guess for me, the Taoist philosophies or understanding of this yin and yang, the balancing of energy, and playing with that energy within the context of relationships, not just, single partner. My wife and I have been polyamorous for several years, and so we've had, partners that we've shared and whatnot together, and still playing with that energetic balance has been a very important part of the sacredness to me, particularly because I have probably only in the last 10 or so years now really tried to actively integrate the divine feminine into my concept of the sacred.
Yeah. So say more.
Well, I mean, a lot of it's psychedelic related. God, there's a whole lot there that we could unpack. I mean, pornography falls into it. I'm also kind of deeply curious about the UFO community. I've had several experiences myself, and some of that also seems to connect back to this resurgence of feminine. I don't really ascribe to necessarily like as much interplanetary as like these spiritual beings, otherworldly beings that are helping to bring balance back into our world. So yeah, there's a lot that I could talk about there that I already do, and so they hear enough of me.
Fair. Yeah, I was just curious to hear a little more. But yeah, that makes sense. And I will say that bringing attention to whatever the divine means to you in a sexual experience and in your relationship and in life in general, I think is beneficial. And if you're wanting to explore the divine feminine, and if that feels like it's useful for you and your relationship, like that's awesome. And if you're wanting to explore the divine internally, I would say you could also explore the divine feminine internally. Like, where does that live in your body? But an interesting thing that I've witnessed in a lot of the more consciousness-oriented scenes, and I'm going to use these gendered terms, masculine and feminine, is that a lot of guys are really diving deep into the sort of the feeling space, the flowy space, the what is called in a lot of these circles the feminine space, the artsy space, the colorful space, all this kind of like ecstatic dancing constantly, and there's great beauty in that. And there's a lot of value to be had in that, but there's not as much of a cultivation of what is considered to be the masculine in a lot of these different traditions, right? Like, how do you sit and be as consciousness? How do you penetrate with intention? How do you be really present with what is, and then be the observer of being present with what is? And what does that do for your relationships? And what does that do for your life? That's a really interesting consideration. And I think it's useful to bring attention to both of those things. But I'm going to loop it into psychedelics right now and take it back to sex, because I remember at one point, so I have communed with mushrooms many times in my life, psilocybin mushrooms. I prefer the term communing rather than taking, because it's more like a relationship with. One time, I just laid down and experienced what I would call the divine feminine dancing, just around me, and I witnessed it, and it was just beautiful, and I wept and I cried, and it was this like awakening of, wow, this is real. What have I been doing? Objectifying people, like using them, not really respecting them and treating them for the divine beings that they actually are, even in human form. And it wasn't, again, something that shifted me forever, but it did plant those seeds. It showed me a possibility. It showed me a possibility of something. And so fast forward to now in my relationship with my girlfriend, I do a practice that I would say is informed in many ways by my experiences with mushrooms, but also a lot of different spiritual practices that I've done, which is where I'll see her name's Naima, and I'll see her as Naima, as human, but then sometimes I will do what's called a transfiguration practice, where I will practice the art of seeing her as divine, as the divine feminine, as something more than just her human form. And I'll relate to her as if she is the divine. And it really shifts something fundamental about our interactions. It's a sort of transpersonal thing. Now, this is not a bypassing of all our human stuff. It's in addition to, it brings something really magical into the sexual experiences. And my first experiences with sort of stepping back from or stepping into the transpersonal realm really happened on psychedelics. And it's interesting. They say, what is it? States are states are accessed, but stages are earned. I feel like psychedelics really showed me the possibility of what is there, but then it took practice over time to be able to more easily access that in my daily life. Because I don't want to take mushrooms every day. I don't want to be in that like deep psychedelic space every day. So it took me practice over time to be able to access that on a regular basis. But doing so has fundamentally changed how I relate. It's beautiful.
And what you're speaking to, integrating psychedelics into your life, the same can be applied to the sexual experience, right? Here's the thing with integration: whether we realize it or not, it's happening. So if we're out watching porn and we're objectifying, that is going to integrate into our waking life. If we are having conscious sex with a partner and we are experience them as goddess or God or whatever, then that also is going to integrate into our lives. So I just love. For me, they are psychedelics and sex are both access points to very similar states.
100%.
I love this, what you spoke about, and I've never heard anybody else say this. It's something that only has recently and organically happened. Courtney and I were, making love a couple months ago, I guess it was, and like all of a sudden, kind of out of nowhere, she just became this Egyptian kind of like Hathor, Isis goddess, and and then I felt as if I became some archetype of a deity of sorts, and it was almost as if these two archetypes were working through us, dancing with each other, and it was a much deeper prayer even experience than anything that I've ever accessed, and have since then it's become intentional and it's begun to integrate into our daily life as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So you can create a ritual with your lover where you probably do want to light some candles actually, or do something to shift up the visual environment, because it's really interesting. When you do shift up your visual environment, your brain and nervous system responds differently. Like you're in a new, like you have the potential to experience a new, expanded or different state of consciousness. So there really is something to switching up your environment. Do that, sit across from your partner, possibly do some breath work or some sort of physical motion to get into your bodies, and then intentionally do the transfiguration practice and say, for this next bit of time, I'm going to see you as the divine, you see me as the divine, and then we start to interact from that place. It can be really, really beautiful and really powerful. And I'll say, it's funny, sex and psychedelics. I've never had sex on psychedelics. I tried once.
Right.
With my previous partner, and it just didn't. Well, it's not that it didn't work. It's just like we just never got there. In the process of moving towards sex, there were just so many other distractions that we just got wrapped up in. Like the texture of the blanket, I remember was so fascinating, and then like the way the sound was happening for both of us, we just ended up sort of swaying back and forth and moving together. We intended to have sex. Like we took mushrooms specifically to try to have sex, but it was so much for us that we just got lost in the sauce, you could say, and somehow ended up in the kitchen marveling at lettuce. It was wild. So that didn't happen. But what I would say is that, so I'll speak about non-ejaculatory orgasms, because this is a really interesting concept for a lot of guys. It was very intriguing for me. side note, if you practice having sex without ejaculating enough and do other practices, you can learn to have orgasmic experiences without ejaculation, which are fucking incredible. But the first time I experienced this, my lover at the time and I were making love, having sex late at night. This went on we had sex for hours together. And it was my first time having that sort of experience. We were totally sober. We were breathing deeply together. We were kissing. We were making out. We started touching each other. We started having penetrative sex. And I remember I started to feel like when I was going in and out of her, that I started to feel this orgasmic energy building in my genitals, and I was moving, and it started to sort of seep and enter up into the rest of my body and down my legs. And I was like, holy shit, I feel like I'm coming. Like, this is amazing. Like, it feels so good. And then it just expanded and expanded. And I was in orgasm. Like, I was orgasming consistently for many minutes on end. And it was phenomenal, like mind blowing. I couldn't believe how pleasurable it was. I felt like my arm was ejaculating, right? Constantly, but I wasn't mechanically, physically ejaculating. And I was in that space. And again, it was one of those experiences like, holy shit, this is what they wrote the books about, you know, like this is what they're talking about. It's this right here. And it was trippy and psychedelic. And I was so in the pleasure of the experience that it just went on and on and on and on. And eventually, a couple hours in, I had to go to the bathroom and pee because that started to build up. But I should say, actually, let me just add this one piece. When I was in that experience, we were like going for it, you know, very active. The risk of ejaculation wasn't even there at all. Like, my body was just in a different space. Like, I was not on the scale of ejaculation. I was on the non-ejaculatory scale, you know? So I wasn't even having to control myself. I was just in the experience. So then I took a pause. I went to the bathroom, and I don't know if you ever tried, like, have you ever tried peeing with an erection? That's very challenging. But I ended up making it work, and I had to sit down on the toilet. But I remember sitting there, and it was dark in the bathroom with a nightlight, and the walls were doing this kind of a thing. They were going, whoa, 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 vibrating and waving like psychedelic waves. And there were sparkles, like heat waves running over the floor and the ceiling. And it was completely psychedelic. I was aroused. I was alive. I had all this sexual energy in me. And it was as if I had taken mushrooms or some form of psychedelics. Incredible. It was incredible. And again, another one of those moments where I realized, wow, this is what people wrote the books about. You know, it is psychedelic. Orgasms, non-ejaculatory orgasms, sexual energy, sex can be an access point to these divine psychedelic realms. Totally blew my mind. So I just sat there for a little while. And then my younger sex-focused brain came online. It shifted. And I thought, wow, if this has been so good so far, just imagine how good it would feel to ejaculate when I go back in. Because up until that point, ejaculation was why you have sex, you know, in my frame of mind. So I went back into the sexual experience with the mission to ejaculate. And it's so interesting. We started to have penetrative sex again. And because my mind made that switch from really being in the moment, present with everything that was, towards ejaculation, I didn't last long at all. And I ejaculated, and it was as if my pleasure was up here, like way off the charts. And as soon as I started ejaculating, it just dropped. Dropped down. It was way less pleasurable to ejaculate than what I had been experiencing in terms of orgasmic sensation. It was let down. There was a very disappointing ejaculatory orgasm. And then that sensation wasn't in my body anymore in the same way. Like, I still felt very good and present and connected, but that sizzle, that charge had disappeared, you know, and I had released it. And it did feel good, but it was not, you know, again, nearly as good as what I was experiencing. So it was a great learning experience for me. And I remember the next day I got very egoic about it and thought, man, I figured sex out. Like, I am a master at this. Like, I figured out how to enter these realms. But then we had sex again, and I came in like a minute. And it took me years actually to figure out how to re-enter those realms with regular practice. It was just a fluke, accidental experience that just happened and showed me it was possible. But it was incredible.
Oh man, that brings up so much for me. God, I don't know, you know, like, I've been studying psilocybin in depth for 25 years. I've facilitated thousands, literally thousands of journeys for people. I've taken hundreds of doses. I've tried to understand what is it that's really going on. I don't ascribe to the, serotonin receptors. It's just some pure biochemical. That's a factor. That's part of it, right? What has helped me, I feel like, gain a more tangible grasp of what's happening in the psychedelic space is the crossover between breathwork, sex, and psychedelics. And what it seems to be the common denominator is chi, or life force, this energy. And as we enhance and cultivate that life force, then we can see things more truly. We can access realms that are already there. We're just not able to tune into them. The healing that can come about, the ability to, there's so many, even what we would call psychic abilities, I'm sure you've read about, if not directly experienced, through this kind of practice. And psychedelics being my kind of professional world for so long, and seeing what's happening in the world of psychedelics, I've tried to at times be like you all, like this is where it all ties together. It's not just some neurochemical biological response. There is something much more profound happening here. And it's really hard, I think, for most people, because in very few walks of our life, particularly sexuality, which is like, that is our most innate transcendental access point, right? But maybe breath work. I guess breath work is even more part of who we are. But we have for so long trained ourselves in the use of sex as this kind of immediate release, and so we don't even have touch points really that help us understand the mystical nature, the mystical power that can be associated with it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the reality is there's a lot of people out there taking psychedelics for their mystical experiences and then using sex to get off, and which is, it's phases. Like we're all in different phases of life, and maybe that's useful at the time, but you're right. Like there is totally a sexual access point to the divine and to the sacred and to the psychedelic, and I think there's just so much crossover there. Interesting thing for me is when you can access those states through breath work and through sex, you are in moment to moment more control of the modulation of the intensity of those experiences. Whereas sometimes with psychedelics, if you take too much or a dose that's not as ideal for you, you can't necessarily bring yourself back down in the same way as you can through breath. And so I don't have enough experience with the intersection of these things to advise one way or the other than just to say, like, you can experience wild, insane, amazing things with just the power of your own breath and body and sexual energy and breath work, and I would encourage people to explore that.
For sure.
You can self-generate. It's amazing.
And within the psychedelic experience, so in Mazatec cultures, there is this tradition, which they're the longest standing current psilocybin practice, and there is this tradition that shamans or people who are coming to a shaman for a ceremony shouldn't have sex for 3 days before or 3 days after their ceremony. And for years, I kind of wondered if that was a cultural taboo, what was going on there, until this practice of semen retention came into my life. And I started to notice that if I went 3 days holding and then took mushrooms, like my whatever psychic or psychedelic abilities just went through the roof. And I have trained a lot of other facilitators, and the men, some of them who I would get close enough with and I could kind of broach this subject, I would suggest that they not ejaculate for 3 to 5 days before a psychedelic work. And every single one of them was just like, oh my God, it's a different world. It's like a half a gram of mushrooms becomes like a 4 or 5 gram trip, because you're already so energetically primed into that space.
Yeah, I love that you brought this up, because I was going to say it earlier in a different part and forgot. If you really want to feel the difference of this, and if you're listening and you are a psychedelic explorer, psychonaut, try like what you just said. not ejaculating for 5 days, go on a mushroom journey. Then later, with the same batch, same quantity, try ejaculating 5 days in a row and doing that same amount and see what happens. It's intense. Yeah, it's different. It'll be different.
Well, it absolutely. And I think for me, like the big takeaway from that is realizing the power that is generated in each of our bodies. We are incredible, complex, miraculous. Like that's so many times I've come out of a mushroom trip. I'm like, what the fuck are we? We are so much more. But sexuality, even more so, the semen retention in particular, has helped me just kind of like come to this not deeper understanding, but greater experience of our expanded nature. And so again, coming back to intention, the setting, you kind of brought that up in terms of like setting yourself up for a sexual experience. If we can intentionally live our lives, and if we can do our best to have our mindset and our physical setting conducive towards these expanded states, towards empowerment, towards self-development, we could have a drastically different world in a very, very short time. I've done, I did a search one time, like how much semen is spilt per day on the planet, right? And there is a Google calculation. Wow. And it just had me thinking, all of this has had me thinking about, I don't want to say wasted potential, but that is the way that it comes to my mind, but like what would our world look like if men, and this, speaking in this context, men were to have this kind of relationship, moreover, with their sexuality? Like, so many people are coming to psychedelics again for depression relief, for anxiety relief. But have you seen your mental health improve since you've started this, different sexual living?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have. And also, I will say that it's not the make or break practice for life, too. Like, it doesn't solve everything. If you look out on YouTube and the internet, you'll see people saying, like, semen retention will regrow your hair if you don't have any hair. Semen retention will make your muscles bigger. Semen retention will, like, fix your vision. Semen retention will make you manifest money out of the blue. You'll get $10,000 in your bank account. No, it definitely doesn't do any of that stuff. But what it does do, if done in an integrative way, with reverence and the occasional ejaculation, in my opinion, is it brings your level of homeostasis up higher than what most people are operating at. It creates a more highly effective and functional and optimized baseline of how you live your day-to-day life. And that impacts everything you do, from your motivation to your clarity to your inspiration and just levels of creativity and life. And it's one of those things where the return on investment of a 15 to 20% boost of creativity, like, you can't even put a figure on that, because that can be something that will completely change your life. If you have one day when you're feeling extra inspired, you might have an idea to start a new business or to shift something important about your life that completely changes the trajectory of everything. But if you're always living in this semi depleted state, you might not have as many days of inspiration. Maybe you don't have a day where that thing happens, or maybe you don't have that conversation with that one person in public because you're feeling a little bit extra tired that day because you stayed up late, watched porn, and whacked off at midnight. Those things, like, we don't think about it, but really life is, it's the sum of all the thousands of tiny decisions we've made up until that point.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it just takes one tiny decision to completely alter the trajectory of things.
That's 100%. It's so well said. It's so many times the little actions that lead to such a big outcome.
Yeah.
I mean, I try for my kind of cap right now, as far as I've gotten, is about 2.5 weeks. And I feel like once I hit a week, I am ready to fucking punch holes in walls or whatever. I could if I needed to. Yeah. I want to go back, though. You brought up something that was really, I think, worth touching on, because it came up in one of your podcasts that I listened to. You talked about this kind of like taking psychedelics for sex and how that worked out. But you have this episode of I took MDMA and went to a sex party, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what was really so touching to me and so relevant to my life. MDMA has only come into my life in the last 3 or 4 years because, like yourself, I was always like plants only, you know.
Yeah.
But you spoke about entering into that heart space, which is at least to me anyway. I experienced that as a sexual act, an intimate experience, if you will. And as I was listening to that episode, I really kind of thought to myself and experienced again how what I understand sex, and I don't mean like penetrative sex. I mean that intimate blending of beings, you know, can just be from an energetic point. We can that this is something particularly men would do well to cultivate. And I'm just curious, like, how that experience has continued, if it has continued to impact you, and how you relate to that kind of intimacy of the heart more than just intimacy of the body. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And there are two main areas where most men are blocked. One of them is in sex. The other one is in the heart. Like, we're very good in the head. We're very good with analytics and making shit happen. But in terms of cultivating deep sexual experiences and deep emotional intimacy, like, we're not as skilled with that, generally speaking, you know, and those are traits that are not celebrated by society or talked about or cultivated in school or anywhere, you know? So it's not like we're not to blame for that, in my opinion, but it's useful to realize that that's the territory that we're living in. And so for me, if you haven't listened to my podcast where I talk about that, I'll share the brief version. I did go to a sex party. I did take it was in between a microdose and a full dose. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was enough to feel it, but it wasn't enough to put me into a complete, you could call it a drug experience, right? And what happened for me was it felt like it was the key that unlocked chains that were holding my heart in this sort of self-protective thing internally. And I just ended up crying and bawling out of love and out of joy and out of this like deep heartfelt openness that I had never experienced before in that way. And it was incredible. And I was doing this on the first floor of this house while people were having sex upstairs. And I was hearing like the screaming and the banging and the thudding while I was bawling my eyes out listening to Sigur Rós on the floor, the first floor of the house, being held by other people. And it was this really incredible experience. And yeah, it didn't stop, you know. Well, the crying eventually faded, but the openness from that experience, it lasted and it persisted. And that's why I think for me, if used in the appropriate context, like MDMA can be a medicine, like a useful medicine, you know? And it was that for me. And I used to be so closed in my heart. Like, it took me until my late 20s to even tell some family members I loved them because I was so afraid of emotional intimacy. You know, I was so blocked in that realm. But that experience helped with that process. Like, holy shit, I do love you. I love you and I love you. And I could actually love you, my friends. Like, wow, I want to express that. If you died right now and I didn't tell you that, that'd be fucked up. I wouldn't be happy with that. You know, I want you to know the depth that I actually feel. And that was, prior to those kinds of experiences, terrifying, you know? It's just scary to reveal oneself because we're programmed as men. Well, you got to hold the line, be closed, like never reveal vulnerability, be strong, take care of your shit, never ask for help. And that was robbing me of one of the most beautiful experiences that's possible in life, you know? And one of the Tantra schools that I studied sex in too, they said, it's entirely possible for you as a man to have incredible sex and non-ejaculatory orgasms and totally bypass your heart in the process. But if you do so, you're going to be, again, robbing yourself of one of the most rich and beautiful experiences you could possibly have being a human, you know, because there's nothing like having truly heart connected, amazing, open, mind blowing, non-ejaculatory orgasmic sex. Like it's incredible. It's incredible. And even take the sex out. Like there's nothing like just being truly rawly open and vulnerable with somebody, being seen in that and witnessing and expressing love in that way. Like, it's amazing.
I notice since my MDMA experiences, I have noticed like there have been discernible times when we've been laying in bed, nothing's happening, we're just laying there, and I can go into my heart and feel my heart connect to their heart. And then that person, whether it be Courtney or her, will initiate sex with me. And it feels like it is a one-to-one response. Like your heart felt my heart open and connect to you, and then your body opened. And I never had any, I never knew that was a thing. We just perceive ourselves, and particularly sex, as this physical experience. And if psychedelics and now sex have showed me anything, it's that we are not primarily physical beings.
Yeah. That's a philosophical rabbit hole to go down for sure. But I do think that, what do I want to say? Yes, you are absolutely right in the sense of, like it's been shown that heart waves travel, right? And people can feel those subconsciously, I believe. And it totally makes sense to me that you could do that with your partner in bed and then she would initiate sex with you. Like that makes total sense and it's beautiful. And I think bringing awareness to that and bringing awareness internally to how we can even generatively spread out heart, love, energy.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yes.
It's incredible. And it 100% impacts intimacy. So example, sometimes in sex, I will, with my partner, sometimes I'll just get lost in the fucking of it because it's fun, and I don't always have the most sacred sex in the world. But sometimes I will visualize, not just imagine, but I will visualize that when I'm fucking her, that my energetic penis or love is going inside of her up into her heart, and I'm fucking her heart energetically open. And I can do that with my fingers too if I'm going down on her. And I remember times when I've tried this and I'll be pleasuring her and then I bring that in. I won't say anything, I won't do anything differently, but her body and her emotionality and her energy will completely change and react to it, and it will open so much more, and it's magical to watch. And I've debriefed this with her sometimes afterwards. Like, did you notice that point where there was a shift? And she said, yeah, I don't know what happened, but it felt amazing. And I felt this big opening inside myself. And then I just started orgasming. It was incredible. And then tears came afterwards. And I said, yeah, that's when I started energetically fucking your heart open with love.
Have you spoken about that on your podcast before?
I think maybe.
I feel like
not a specific episode, but I've shared some of that before, and yeah.
Okay, I can't remember if I don't know if it was for you or where I heard that, but I also have practiced that and saw the results. It's really amazing. It's profound. It just again goes back to our deeper nature. I am curious though. I've been wanting to ask this for a minute, and this is kind of a part of this. So What I am perceiving here in our conversation at this moment is, we're talking about operating on the energetic level, right? Physical is part of that, but it's an energy that is being communicated and conveyed. We've talked a little bit about this kind of balancing of masculine and feminine energies. This is a question I have never asked anyone, but it has been on my mind for quite a while.
Great.
And I saw that you do. I haven't listened to this one, but I've seen that you had an episode on threesomes and whatnot. And I have wondered, or I have how to even ask this. There is in this balancing of energy within the context of multiple partnered sexual experiences. Have you found yourself navigating that shift in how have you found yourself, if at all, navigating the energy within those particular experiences. Does it make sense what I'm asking here?
It sort of makes sense, but I think I need a little bit more clarification. Are you asking, like, in multiple partner experiences, how does the masculine and feminine get balanced, or how does energy get balanced in general, or what? Can you tease it apart a little bit more?
Yeah, well, it starts with masculine and feminine. That's where it starts for me. And then that translates into this kind of direct energetic exchange, like flowing through people. But it's moreover, because how I understand it and I experience it within single partner sex, that interplay and balance of masculine and feminine is kind of like that's the main platform that we're working from, right? And then go ahead.
So let's expand that a little bit, because it's super rich and interesting for me. First, an analogy. I'm a musician. I studied music a lot. I love playing music. Fucking love music and psychedelics. Side note, that's just like, whew. Yeah, sometimes I love that more than sex. But what I would say is that I can totally play music with one person and be locked in with them. And it's a beautiful experience and exchange. And I can play music with 2 other people or 3 other people or 4 other people. And we can all be in the same river together, flowing. And it is a different experience than the one-on-one, but we can all still be there in the same experience. Similarly, in sex, there is a difference when you're having sex with just one person. You can be back and forth. There is that natural polarity of the experience. But with 3 people or 4 people, you can still play with that same polarity. You can play with a lot of different styles of polarity too. So I'll just add a couple in here. Say I'm with my female partner. Instead of using masculine and feminine, let's just use penetrating and receptive, just for fun, right? Just for the sake of experiment. I can be penetrating her. She can be receiving me, physically or energetically or through actions. Maybe I'm doming her, or telling her what to do, and she's submitting to that in a consensual way. There's the doing to action. She's receiving that. She could also do that to me. Maybe I'm laying down, she's going down on me. Maybe she has a finger inside of my anus while she's pleasuring my prostate, and I'm receiving. So then the polarity is flipped in that experience, right? But then there are also some different styles of relating that you can play with too. So say, for example, if you bring elements into this, I love this, like water, air, earth, fire. 4 different fundamental styles of touch and exchange. Say you both come to each other with the watery perspective. You can even throw masculine and feminine out the window. Like, you're lusciously moving around. Maybe there's massage oil. You're very liquidy. There's French kissing. There's all this kind of stuff. And it's a beautiful way of interacting. Then possibly you can switch to fire. And that could be more of the slapping, holding down, biting, that sort of fiery energy. And then it's interesting to, if you really want to get into the play of it, try fire and water, or water and air. Air being the more like light touches like this, and grazing and tickling. And so I share all that to say there are other forms of different kinds of polarity that you can play with. And then, so let's bring a third person in. Say, for example, I'm being sexual with my partner and a third person. I can be in the doing to role for both of them, in a sense. Like, I could be pleasuring them both or telling them what to do, or one of them can be doing it to 2 of us. So in a threesome type scenario, one of my favorite things to do, side note, I would love to have more of these experiences, but I've had enough to experiment, is we'll play rotational dom. So one person will dom the scenario for a little while, then we'll switch. And then we'll switch again. And so there's a polarity in that too. And 2 people are holding one pole, one person is holding the other pole. And it creates this really beautiful sexual exchange. There's also the experience where you can all 3 get lost in the sauce together, and just be in the mesh of lovemaking. And one of the things that I think is so beautiful about multiple partnered sexual experiences is that you can enter into it's almost like you're entering into the field of lovemaking. Versus this just strictly polar lovemaking experience with one person. You're now moving between people and in and out, and you've entered into this. Yeah, it's like you're stepping into a beautiful cloud or energetic space of sex. You can just exist in that and explore that. And I love that. I think it's really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I just said a lot of things, so I'm going to pause and see, did that kind of like answer your question, at least from my perspective?
Beautifully. The elementals is a very helpful perspective, right? Because there's not this polar necessarily, you know, one versus the other. There is this interplay and dance of multiples. That was very helpful. It's, you know, this is God. I have to wonder how many listeners we've lost at this point, at least in my audience, just because it's such a thing. Like when you say like threesomes, people are like, oh my God. First of all, like my experiences with multi-partner sex was like, I was surprised how non-pornographic it could be or was, you know, it's like, oh, this isn't just like some porn. This is a beautiful like interplay of energy and people
100%.
dancing together. So, you know, within this, and as I, you know, my family, my polyamorous life is why my family cut me off. They're like, yeah, too bad. We're too Catholic for all that. And I'm curious, like for yourself, as this is your work, how has your family responded? How has your community shifted, you know, as you've stepped into this?
Yeah. Well, thankfully, I have a very loving and accepting family. And I would say I feel like, sorry, I keep having burps. I don't know what's happening here. There's something that wants to be purged from me. I have a very loving and accepting family. I could come out as gay or bi or trans or whatever. My family would still love and support me. I feel deeply, deeply grateful for that. So thank you, parents. Thank you, sister. Thank you, grandma. I actually grew up with 3 grandmothers because my entire life, my grandmother had another female partner. And so it was like alternative relating styles were very normal for me from a young age. Though I did still have to go through all of the societal programming of unlearning a lot of stuff when I got later in life. But what I would say also is that most people fantasize about multiple partner sexual experiences. I don't know if you've looked at the research about this. Like, it's one of the most common fantasies there is.
For sure.
Even if you're never actually going to do it, like I bet you 90% of people listening have fantasized about this while they're masturbating. It's very sexy. You know, it's very sexy. And so, yeah, and in terms of my sharing this stuff with the world, for me, the value of talking about this in a down-to-earth, grounded, normalizing way far outweighs the risks of having people be mad at me or cut me out of their lives. You know, like this feels like a mission to me. Yes. I believe the world would be a better place if we all brought more intentionality to sex. So I'm going to be the guy that stands up and talks about the shit that no one else is talking about, but everybody's thinking about, and do it in a way that's grounded, that is legit, you know, and taking trainings and holding myself accountable to make sure I'm actually doing the things that I talk about too. So I can not only say the things, but live in the way that has a positive impact. You know, like that's very important to me as well.
Yeah, that's the flag I planted with psychedelics. And if it wasn't psychedelics, it would be sex. Which, you know, like again, like if this is going to be a healthy part of our lifestyle, then we've got to talk about it.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, there was one thing I wanted to say. What was that? Oh, it was right there. Was it threesomes? Was it sex and psychedelics? Yeah, it was threesomes. Just to normalize this a little bit more for anyone listening, threesomes will almost certainly not look like the threesomes you see in porn. Though I have had those experiences, and they can be incredibly erotic. I have also had threesome experiences that went horribly wrong. Somebody got triggered. I've been triggered. Like I've cried in threesomes. I've been very upset. Other people have cried in threesomes that I've been in, and we've just had to pause and hold space for them. And that has been, at least at this point in my life, that's an understood part of the experience. It's not about getting off. It's not about having the most hot, like, sexual fantasy you can possibly experience. It could be partially about that, but what it's more about is accepting what is actually there and exploring the dynamic that exists between 3 people. You know, like what authentically wants to come through. You want to experience a fantasy where 2 people go down on you and fuck you at the same time? Great. explore that. But if in the exploration of that, somebody gets upset and something needs to shift, be with that, it's really beautiful to see what can happen. Sometimes I've ended up just laying and cuddling and breathing with two people because that's what the moment called for, and if you're listening to this and thinking, wow, Taylor, you have threesomes constantly and you're having the most wild sexual experiences all the time. I don't find that to be true. It's been actually a long time since I've had a threesome type experience, but I have had a handful of them, enough to be able to speak to them and know that they can be beautiful and horrible. It's traumatic, and there's been some research that has looked at this too, in terms of when people play out different fantasies in their sexual relationships, what's the range of impact that it can have on a relationship, and what's the range of damage that it can have on a relationship. If you play out a certain fantasy like spanking, for example, if a little bit of light BDSM is a fantasy, it can have a light positive impact on your relationship. But also if it goes poorly, it's not going to ruin your relationship, right? Like the risk and the reward is small. But with multiple partner scenarios, the risk is very large. The potential reward is very large as well too. But if you don't approach with care and caution and communication and awareness, like it has train wrecked many relationships.
Yes.
Myself included,
Well, and it can never be an option to think that this is somehow going to fix a relationship or even looking at it to improve a relationship. This is something that we're entering into consciously. If there is benefit, then it will come from our intentionality and our awareness to the full situation, not an individual's wants or desires. And I do think like that subject, the subject of multi-partner sex, is still like among the most taboo, but it can be some of the most rewarding. What set me off on the path of polyamory, the interesting twist here, like I said, my family has cut me off for it, but it was my parents' divorce that ultimately put me exploring this, because when you see the divorce rates to the extent that they are, and human beings are I do not believe that the vast majority of humans are naturally monogamous, then there's something here that we need to explore to improve our own quality of life and understand ourselves more deeply, to eliminate shame. And so it's just been, for me, it's been such an enlightening course of action. It's helped me understand my relationship with the feminine, because so much of it did stem originally from this kind of, porno, like I want to have multiple women or whatever. And then you step into it and you find out like it's so much more responsibility. You have to bring so much more of yourself to the moment and be so much more aware that it becomes more beautiful than you could ever imagine.
Totally. Yeah. And it's just, yeah.
Can
the exploration, let me just say
please.
The exploration of it, the exploration will almost certainly be different than your expectation of the exploration. Like you said, too. just to hit it one more time. So many guys fantasize about being with two women at once, right? But for the guys who have experienced that, that shit can be crazy in the sense of like, it can make you crazy. What happens if in that experience, the two women discover they're way more interested in each other than they are you? Whew. Like, you didn't think you'd be upset and jealous with women in the bedroom, but all of a sudden, like all your shit's up and you're mad and they're connecting with each other. And it's just like, there's just so many other, so many pieces there.
And then if you're actually in like a long-term relationship with two women, and that like the complexity of that and the humbling that brings on is there's enormous value there. I would love to, if we could, we got about 15 minutes left here. Yeah. I would love to get back into pornography a little bit. So I also heard like a fucking gem. I've been wanting for a very long time to get some validation that I finally got a few weeks ago listening to your podcast. Actually, there was a guy on there. I gotta get this guy on the show because he was
Tyson.
taking psychedelics and watching porn. I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
It blew my mind. So I really want to have a conversation with him. I've already reached out to him a few days ago. But
good. He's great.
Seemed like it, yeah. But more specifically, I guess this is the other thing. It's like when I mention semen retention to my friends, they're like, hell no. Mm-hmm. If I mention, finding a different relationship with pornography, it's usually a hell no as well. The thing that Tyson really helped me with was I have felt a very deep sense, like there's obviously times when we want to be sexual. We are men, and that visual stimulus is really valuable. Totally. Our partner's not available or not there. And so naturally, most people are drawn to porn. I, began a while back, and I'm like talking with my partners about, creating our own personal content for our own personal use. Yeah. And I found an enormous energetic difference between the two. And I've tried to find research around this. I've never found any research that shows like the difference in neurological impact or social impact for, porn, or I don't like to call it porn, but, sexual content that is created by, two partners versus watching third-party porn. Yeah. And so I just would love to kind of like, as much as we can, dig into the realities of pornography and like from both sides, like the benefit of having some kind of external visual media and the detriment. It's pretty big for 15 minutes, but let's see what we can get here.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to be a porn evangelist and say that everyone should stop watching porn. Mm-hmm. Just like I'm not going to say everyone should stop taking whatever substances you want to take, but bring mindfulness and attention to the impact that it has on your life. I like to say porn is like cocaine for your penis. And at least porn on the internet, like mainstream high-speed internet porn, like that's a super stimulus. Like it's designed, it's filmed and edited to be as stimulating as possible to your nervous system. And no human can ever compare to a 5-minute video that's changing camera angles to a new genital position every 10 seconds. It's just impossible. It's just not possible. So do you want to flood your system with that? Maybe it's going to have certain impacts, Alternatively, you could film porn with your partner and then use that. If you want to have a porn-like experience, use that when you're not with them. One thing, though, that I just want to bring in because I love it so much, in my previous career, I was a professional photographer and filmmaker. And this one time I got hired and brought on this incredible trip through Tibet and through Tibetan monasteries in India. But in Tibet, I got hired to photograph a lot of these monasteries. And it was an amazing, amazing experience. And one of the things that really struck me was at one point I was in the tea room of this monastery at like 15,000 feet or something, way up in the mountains. I stood up on this chair and got as high as I could in the room with my wide angle lens to take a picture of the whole space. And when I was up there, I noticed that there was a rafter that I was just slightly above the rafter, and it was painted with all these beautiful patterns on the side and the underside. And I looked up above and I saw, the entire top side of this rafter is painted with as much detail and beauty and intricacy as every other side. Nobody's going to ever see it in this space, And afterwards I climbed down and sat back down with the tea and asked the monks through a translator, what's the deal with that? Why is that painted? And they said, well, the divine is everywhere. The divine sees everything. Why would we rob the divine of the beauty that could be there? So similarly, I like to try this thought experiment on. Would you do something alone in your room, maybe it's porn, if you knew your partner was right next to you watching it? Like, what would the impact on them be? What if they were with you all the time? What if they saw everything that you did? Would they be inspired by what you're doing? Or would they feel frustrated or offended or want to lose connection with you. You know, it's a very interesting thing to consider. Similarly, you could do the same thing with the divine, not in this sort of punitive, like God will punish you for your sins way, but like, what's the relationship you want to have with life, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that really impacts me. It really impacts me if I stop and pause and take a couple breaths, if I get the urge to look at porn.
Mm-hmm.
Is that really what I want to be doing with life? Is that really the relationship I want to be cultivating with this existence? I don't think so. You know, I don't think so. It's not to say that I haven't slept, et cetera, you know, in the past, but like, it's a practice. It's a practice, right? And I will say, jumping back around, there is research that shows when a man watches porn by himself, it's way more detrimental to his brain and emotions and relationship than if he watches it in connection in the same room with his partner. And I don't know about the relationship of porn filmed with the partner, but I imagine because there is that emotional connection, it's a similar experience. So again, I just said a lot of different things, and I'll pause.
No, I think that big question of what a relationship do you want to have with the all, right? Is really, like, we can take that into food. If we were to have that intention into many more aspects of our lives, you can just imagine how much would change there.
It's impactful. It's impactful.
It is. I mean,
let me just say, because you might think, like I have thought, that, oh, well, if I just do it behind my closed door, like, it's not, you know, but it doesn't matter. Like, no one's going to know. I'm just going to be able to go about my day and be fine. But it does. Like, we don't really think about this. But if you, like, say, for example, if you have kids, you're raising your kids, right? And they're in the living room watching TV or whatever. You go into your bathroom, spend 10 minutes, like, watching some wildly intense porn, masturbating and ejaculating. You go back out there. It's time to be with them. What energetics are you bringing into that space with you? What would the difference have been if, yes, maybe you went to the bathroom, but then you did some push-ups and you did even like 2 minutes of mindfulness breath? Like, I know when you have kids, you don't have all the time in the world, right? But what if you just seeded a little bit more intentionality into whatever you're embodying or carrying with you when you go back into that room? Big difference on your reactivity, on your inspiration, on your creativity, on your able to project and transmit love from the heart. You know, like, all these things matter, and they add up over time cumulatively. So patterns really add up, kind of like we said. Like, it's all just the summation of the thousands of tiny decisions you've made over time.
Yeah, no, my first 1999 very first mushroom trip said, it's all energy, Eric. It's all energy. And that, as I still try to integrate that in my life and be more and more present and aware that everything that we engage in is an energetic exchange. If I'm watching porn, and the stark, undeniable realization that the vast majority of internet porn is connected to human trafficking was the thing that really helped to shift my mind, because that is not an energy that I want to be contributing to.
Yeah.
Now, again, like you said, it's a practice, and I'm never going to say that I've got this thing solved, you know, but certain realizations along the way have certainly helped to modify my behavior.
Totally. Yeah, I've recorded a podcast also with this guy, Eric Everhard. I don't know if you listened to that episode. It was so interesting to hear him talk about, at one point, he had to have sex on camera with somebody who they basically hated each other. But they had to make it look real. And I'm thinking to myself, man, how many times when I was younger did I masturbate to people who hated each other, who were just doing it because they wanted to make money, or masturbated to somebody who was basically being forced to have sex on camera. And like, wow, what is that impact? Like, that's a whole other rabbit hole, but it's part of the reality of what's out there.
It is. And it gives us the opportunity to choose, you know?
Totally.
That's the value of contrast, is helping us determine what we do and what we don't want in our lives. And I certainly want more people like you in my life. The information that you communicate out there is so incredibly valuable. I truly believe that, like, for men in particular, this is such an incredibly important topic that can impact so many aspects of our lifestyle. And I've been following you for years. I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to share your work with my listenership and to get to connect with you and express my gratitude. And I think that's a good place to end. I know could go on for a couple more minutes here, but let's leave it where it is. This is beautiful. And just thank you so much. Before we go, what does psilocybin say to you, Taylor? Sorry.
Yeah. What does it say to me? Well, let me just also say thank you for having me. It's a really awesome opportunity to talk about this stuff. I haven't had an interview like this before where I got to dive into sex and psychedelics. And so thank you for the questions. Thank you for the podcast. Thank you for being here. And I'm sure you'll put all my links beneath the episode.
For sure. Oh yeah.
Contact me, etc.
Oh, for sure.
So what does psilocybin say to me?
Yeah.
To me, it says, just be in your body and be alive. Like, that's ultimately what it says to me. I've tried different forms of communing with psilocybin, some of them seated, some of them going on journeys. For me personally, that doesn't work for me as well. Like, it makes me want to get out. Here it is. It makes me want to get out in nature. Like, if I commune with mushrooms, it's like, go to nature now, connect there. Like, that's what your soul needs. That's what your body needs. And so, man, I love being at waterfalls or running through the woods or being with friends outdoors, or even just sitting outdoors, feeling the wind, feeling the aliveness of everything. Like, it just says commune with it all. Be with, be connected, feel connection, feel aliveness. And yeah, I love that.
Real quick, what do you have, like a regular practice, or what kind of relationship do you have?
Relationship to
psychedelic with psilocybin?
Psychedelics. Yeah, I wouldn't say I have a practice per se, but how many? I don't know. Like, maybe it varies. Like, I haven't communed this year, but I have plans on the calendar to do so in the very near future with a group of people that's close to me. And I've done that in various forms and various groups where we'll go. Actually, yeah. So if I'm doing this in a group intentionally, we'll go out in nature again, and maybe we'll camp and just be by a river, turn our phones off and just be in the experience, oftentimes bringing instruments, sometimes just exploring like creatures on the rocks, and if it's MDMA, like, that's a very occasional thing too, maybe a couple times a year or less for that. But it's always done for me now in a more ceremonial type way that can include debauchery and wildness, but usually just results in deep connection with people, and I've tried microdosing with psilocybin, and I don't know that maybe I haven't done it right. It doesn't, I don't know. I haven't received the benefits that some people have, but I will say that it also serves to be like a reset button for me at different points in life. Like, if I need a reset, mushrooms are my access point, more so than any other substance, I would say.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks again so much. I really appreciate your time, Taylor. You're a rock star, brother. Really love your work.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.